Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show. As you can see, I am in a different location. I am in a hotel room in downtown Victoria with all its vibrancy, not as vibrant as the Hillside and Quadra neighborhood where I was living for just over a month. Hillside and Quadra being well, what's my old joke? That in Hillside and Quadra neighborhood, the crack whores are just friends you haven't made yet. This is only my second broadcast of the week, and I feel I owe you an explanation why. Essentially, I was, chased out of my apartment. The internet was being sabotaged. That is to say, cords were being removed and the internet beacon being hidden on me. I moved into this place, July the 14th, this apartment, with my daughter and her new husband. And this has been, troublesome from the start. That my daughter had indicated a willingness to share a place with me. And it seems like this has been going on for a year and a half, that she was coming, then she wasn't coming, she was coming, she wasn't coming. Ironically, the reason that she and her husband finally managed to get to Victoria is because of COVID-19. That, of course, COVID-19 is the reason why I represented a deadly medical threat to her, I suppose, because of my age. Okay, let's see. Your connection is unstable. Please wait while we try reconnecting. Okay, well, it seems to be going. Yeah, and the only reason that my daughter and her new husband were able to come to Victoria is because for several months now, the Canadian government has been paying people who are not working, including people who were not working for months or years before COVID-19 struck. The Canadian government has decided to willfully destroy the economy, but it's going to keep paying people for a little while at least. And where's the money going to come from? Well, they're going to borrow it all. And Canada does not have a money printer go brrr like the United States, and this is all going. But as I say, this was bad news from the start. That my daughter arrived in Victoria, and they were supposed to be staying at one hotel, and they weren't there, and they were at a different hotel. So the idea was, they had a suite, so the idea was that I was going to move into their suite. They found a place, a permanent place. So a date was set, and they were supposed to come there at 9 o'clock to my hotel. You remember it? That was the big handsome room I was in. And so I confirmed the night before that they were going to be there at 9. And yes. So I called at 8 o'clock just to make sure that everything was ready, and there was no answer. So I left a message, and I left text messages, and by the time it got to, 10:30, checkout time was 11. I was absolutely frantic. And so 11 o'clock passed, and so I had to ask for another day at the hotel, and the kindly clerk who I'd been dealing with for, 7 weeks said, no, you can't have that room for another day. It's taken. And then I really panicked, and she was a very nice woman, and she said, look, you can stay there for another day, and I'll move these people I'll upgrade them into a different room. And so I headed out to the hotel to find them, and it turns out that they were asleep. And so, I don't know, about half an hour later, they're ready to walk to my hotel, and there's no apologies from my daughter. The alarm clock was set improperly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The phone was off for some reason, you know the story, right? So anyway, I was out like about $115 there for what, a 2 hour stay. So we moved to their place, and it's just pandemonium from the start, with screaming arguments, well, mostly bellowed obscenities and threats from her husband, who is he's a convicted felon, or as we say in Canada, he's been convicted of an indictable offense. And he's a wife beater, and he has beat my daughter up several times, almost to death. He likes to choke her. Uh, so eventually a place was found, and it turned out that they could start moving in like 2 days before. And what they did essentially was they moved there and left me alone in the hotel room. I had decided that given how panic-stricken and last minute my last two moves had been, I didn't want to go through that again. And the hotel was booked until Saturday morning. And so the idea was that we would move on Friday, and they didn't show up on Friday. And frantic phone messages and texts were ignored. And so eventually a text came in the evening saying, "Oh no, we're coming around tomorrow morning." And I was absolutely furious because I hadn't done my show that day. I hadn't done my show because I was going to be moving. So they show up. I can't get a hold of them on Saturday morning either, and they show up at 10:45 and they say, "You're not packed. Why aren't you packed?" And I said, "I didn't know you were coming," which was true. And this was blamed on the husband, and my daughter refused to take any responsibility. You're seeing a pattern here. But so we move into the place, and there's, again, it's just pandemonium, with just both of them getting drunk every night, smoking high THC dope, and these ferocious fights breaking out. And I was I hadn't been sleeping properly for weeks because of being woken up at all hours of the late evening or early morning because of this. And on Sunday evening, Monday morning, there was another physical attack, which left my daughter with a black eye and a big scratch on her nose and two large bruises on her neck where she'd been choked. She told me that the only reason that he hadn't killed her is because his mother, who he had invited along with two other people into the apartment without asking me, had walked into the room while the attack was going on. And my daughter fled, and she didn't have keys, so she was locked out, and she had to go to a bed and breakfast. And I finally, it took me pretty much a whole day to run her down. And she was saying she didn't want to come back. Okay. But then eventually she did at 11 o'clock. And she and I barricaded the door. I went to bed about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the husband shows up, and of course she lets him in. And when was it? Was it on Wednesday morning? I was awoken by bellowed obscenities, and my daughter shrieking in terror just after 1 o'clock in the morning, just after 3 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, okay, this is it. This is it. I'd wondered about going to the police beforehand, and then I decided that, yeah. I walked to the police headquarters on, when was this? I guess it must have been Wednesday, yeah. And I talked to a police officer, and he didn't really tell me much that was of much use. And then later in the day, I found out that the internet had been sabotaged again, and I thought, okay, this is it. This is the end. So I called the police. 2 police cars came, 3 cops, and they took my keys and they went up. I explained everything that had gone on, and they went up to the apartment and they interviewed them and they came back downstairs. None of it. That's actually what they told me. And then they said, this is a volatile situation and you have to leave. What? Yes, you have to leave immediately. But I wanted to help my daughter with affinities, so I guess that's what we see in this case. In any event, I won't be making that mistake again, and I don't think I'm going to be having anything. But when I disappeared from, crack central for Victoria, it's also close, I'm told, to the hooker stroll. If you're listening to my stream in the last few weeks, you will have heard the wail of almost unending wail of ambulances and police sirens, because it's just that vibrant. But it turns out that the whole of Douglas Street is pretty much Douglas is Edmonton's main drag, and it's pretty vibrant. And something happened today directly across the street from where I'm staying, not across the thoroughfare, but like the side street, so I could look up my window and watch it. That I noticed this morning that there were 3 cop cars, or 2 cop cars and a cop truck of some kind, and their lights were flashing, and there were all these policemen in the parking lot of Paul's Motor Inn, which has a distinctive copper-colored roof. It's a Victoria landmark for decades. In fact, the fellow who owned it was a client of Doug Christie, who I used to work for, and he owns other properties, including a luxury hotel in James Bay, where I once stayed after I won some sort of award. But I find out, well, here's the story from CTV News. Man arrested after tense standoff at Victoria homeless shelter. One man has been arrested following it. Heavily armed officers with the Victoria Police Department and Greater Victoria Emergency Response Team descended on the scene of the former Paul's Motor Inn in early Friday morning. Police asked the public to avoid the area and close nearby streets due to a weapons complaint at the building, which is being used as a temporary homeless shelter during the COVID-19 pandemic. You see, despite the fact that there are fewer than 150 cases on Vancouver Island and 3 deaths, everything was shut down. All of the hotels, motels were all shut down, and some of them opened up, but it was very slow, and the U.S. border is still closed, and of course Victoria is a tourist town, and Washington State is just, 60 miles away. So it's very bad news, this COVID panic for the hoteliers of Victoria. And so what the city of Victoria has taken to doing is to taking over these abandoned hotels and motels and turning them into homeless shelters. Now, Victoria has become Canada's homeless capital, because Victoria all but advertises for homeless people to come here. They had come here in the past, largely for the reason that Victoria has the mildest winter of any city in Canada. But they get all these services now. Oh, and much of downtown Victoria and environs has been turned into what appears to be permanent tent cities. Block after block after block after block, just like Los Angeles. That kind of vibrancy. So back to the story, police said officers were responding to reports of a person with a potential firearm in the 1900 block of Douglas Street. At least 9 Victoria police officers and a police dog were on the scene by 9:15 a.m. Some officers were seeking cover behind parked cars in the corners of nearby buildings. And there is I'm looking at a picture of this police rescue truck, which looks like it could, run through walls. Just before noon, the man was outside the suite when the police fired less lethal rounds, striking the man. Do they mean rubber bullets? Officers moved in to arrest him and took him to a waiting ambulance. The temporary housing facility has been at the center of multiple complaints from residents and calls for police recently. Just over a week ago, Victoria police seized a replica assault firearm from a man in the parking lot of the motel. And there's a bunch of related stories attached to this. Oh, yes. It's been a nightmare. Victoria businesses concerned about homeless shelters and city hotels. Police seize loaded rifle from Victoria Hotel, housing homeless. That's a different hotel. That's the old Comfort Inn on Blanchard Street, which I walked by dozens of times. And I guess, a COVID killed that. And another story about just how terrified people are. Overwhelming and frustrating. Victoria residents fed up with police incidents at homeless hotel. Yeah, this is the Travelodge Hotel in Gorge Road, which is across the Inner Harbor. I've noticed that Victoria, I don't know, in the last year or so, it's become a very nasty place. There are crazy people, lunatics on the streets at all hours, not just on Douglas Street, screaming obscenities. There's graffiti everywhere now. There are groups of menacing, clearly deranged people wandering about, seemingly at all times. How did this happen? Well, Victoria was, for decades, dominated by British people who moved here after the Second World War. And they're pretty much all dead now. But what happened to Victoria is very similar to what happened to Seattle and Portland, which is to say the city was inundated by foreigners. Foreigners who were upset that where they came from had become nasty places. So they decided to move to a nice place. Unfortunately, they brought their poisonous politics with them. There's 9 councillors in Victoria, and that includes the mayor. 3 out of the 9 councillors are lesbians. Yeah, how about that? Huh? And one of them is a Native Indian activist. One of them is, I got to be careful here, he is a lover of Soviet communism, which he's made clear in his writings. And a couple of years ago, he tried to get Christmas decorations banned on city property, even if they were paid for by others. He tried to do this. There was some embarrassment for him when an old press release was shown of him taking part in a menorah lighting ceremony for Hanukkah in City Hall. Oh, and the mayor, of course, Lisa Helps, she didn't tell us she was a lesbian when she ran for mayor. She's not from Victoria. Most of these people aren't from Victoria. We have a councillor called Sharmark Dubois, and he is a Somali refugee who came to Canada only in 2012. So it says here, Sharmark Dubois cast his first vote in October 2018, at the same time was elected as a Victoria City Councillor. How about that? Let's see. At the national level, he was a member of the Executive Committee of the Canadian Council for Refugees. Refugees bringing in refugees. He has worked at the Intercultural Association of Greater Victoria and the Victoria Immigrant Refugee Services Centre, which is not far from here on Quadra Street. And it is based out of the Anglican Church. But here in Victoria, elsewhere in America, it's typically the Catholics and the Lutherans who are responsible for inundating Minnesota and Maine with Somali refugees. But in Victoria, it's the Anglican Church. Xenophilia rules the day here in Victoria. I moved here in 2001. And the thing that struck me when I'd be walking the streets in Victoria, and I was getting this weird feeling of deja vu, and I didn't understand why. And then it hit me that Victoria, circa 2001, was very similar to what Vancouver had been in 1971, both in terms of demographics and in the relative lack of sprawl. You could still, they had a 5-story building limit, so church spires could be seen for miles. The car dealerships still located in downtown, and all the car dealerships left Vancouver in the downtown Vancouver in the 1970s. It was a very, very pleasant town. There's a lot of Edwardian homes here, a great many of them. Much, much friendlier place than Vancouver had become. People say hello or good morning to on the streets. There's a tradition here in Victoria. When people get off the bus, they yell out "thank you" to the bus driver. Quite charming, you know. But no, in the aim of diversity, I guess Victoria wasn't very diverse at all. No, that's why I liked it when I moved here, because I suppose one of the two main reasons, the other one being crippling real estate prices, the other reason I left Vancouver is I didn't want to live in a city that was non-Canadian. And Victoria seems to be hell-bent on becoming a non-Canadian city as soon as possible, with all of the concomitant problems that come with vibrancy and diversity. So, people say to me, why don't you move island? It's cheaper there, and they don't have the problems that Victoria has. Well, yeah, I suppose it's a possibility. But I moved to Edmonton for a job in 1992, and I didn't know a soul there, and it almost broke me. And the only people that I know in the world, personally, they live in Victoria. So if I were to move up island, I would be essentially, alone. And at my age, as you understand it, it's difficult to meet new people, to make friends. I'm considering it, but I'm considering other chances. But that's my Sitrep, or situation report. Okay, no, my pension has not come through again. Just Service Canada, a whole tons of their workers were removed from their offices because it wasn't safe for them to work there, apparently. And I don't know when that will come through. Dawn from Beyond says, I'm sure a lot of us have been sending prayers for Kevin, and will continue to do so. I thank you very much for that. Polygon says, Wu flu is the biggest and gayest moral panic in human history. I don't know in human history, but it's certainly the greatest moral panic in my lifetime, and perhaps since the First World War. Okay, so oh yeah, I'll just mention this. When I was speaking to the police dispatcher before the cops were dispatched, I was asked an incredible number of questions. My birth date, my daughter's birth date, how old my daughter's husband was, etc., 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 a physical description of him and her. And I was asked whether he was white, and I said, well, he's half Indian. That was, in retrospect, that was probably a serious error, because Canadians will know this, Americans will not. There have been several sort of copycat. There's a copycat Black Lives Matter movement in Canada, but it has to do with so-called Indigenous people, where a myth has been created in the last few months that police in Canada, local police and the RCMP, have nothing better to do but to hunt down and kill Native Indians. So the police are, as a result, very loath to get involved with Native Indians, or even half Native Indians. Okay. My Trail of Disgrace says KMG is almost at 1,000 followers, so make sure to follow. Yes, yes, indeed. And YT says, help the man out. PayPal. My PayPal is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. For those of you who don't use PayPal, or don't want to use PayPal, and if you live in Canada, money can be sent directly to my bank account at kevingrace@shaw.ca. Uh, Cops never believe in-laws in domestic disputes. I suppose so. There was the physical evidence, but I really got the impression from this lead policeman that he did not like me. He said that when we arrived, you seemed agitated. And I was speaking in a very normal voice, not loud, not overstressed, etc. Not using profanities or anything like that. Speaking much like this, I told him I was agitated because I was in fear of my life and of my daughter's life. But again, the cops seem to be very much put out by being called on what I guess they saw as a wild goose chase. Okay, is the stream buffering for anyone else? Well, it buffered twice, but it hasn't in, 20 minutes or so. Buffering badly now. I'm sorry about that. I don't know. Well, obviously there's nothing I can do. I just lost the audio. The connection is off. Buffering bad. Okay. Let's see. KMG's connection is toast. Let's see. I don't know. Someone send me a new comment and see whether it shows up, okay? Okay, it's fine now. All right. Alex Dillard says set up a My Service account. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, let's talk about Portland, which, as I say, was a lovely city on the West Coast. Well, not exactly on the West Coast, but close to the West Coast. And it's a city of water and mountains, like Seattle and Vancouver and Victoria. People who are partisans of the northeast of the United States and the the northwest of the United States and the southwest of Canada like to speak of Cascadia. The people in this area, the Lower Mainland, Vancouver Island, state of Washington, state of Oregon, particularly in the coastal regions, they have a lot in common. But Portland has gone to hell, as I say, for largely the same reason that Victoria has gone to hell, that it has been invaded by creeps. And Jim Kunstler has been monitoring the situation, and he writes this morning, when Portland, Oregon Mayor Ted Wheeler dropped in to check the peaceful protest action down at the federal courthouse Wednesday night in his spiffy REI riot casuals and dual-purpose COVID-19 riot mask with matching riot goggles, he seemed a little surprised to find himself in the midst of a riot. Perhaps he had not been following all the Twitter videos of what looked like a road warrior free-for-all, what with the Antifa soldiers ripping down fences, banging wrecking bars through the ground floor protective barriers, shooting Roman candles and laser beams at the pitifully small crew of federal officers, and hurling rocks, bottles, human waste, and anything else that handed them in their determination to bum rush the entrance and burn the place down. Mayor Wheeler also serves as the city's police commissioner, but he apparently forgot to notify the department that something might require their attention down there on Southwest 3rd Avenue. The feds were on their own. Mayor Ted made his way to the front of the mob, pulled on his chin while surveying the colorful scene, and then, surprise, the mob discovered he was among them and turned its ire on him, crying in Antifa vernacular, "Fuck you, Ted, and resign, asshole." As a few bottles and gobs of suspicious liquid flew his way, he began to comprehend that his grandstanding wasn't appreciated, and he withdrew to the safety of his nearby mayoral eyrie with his security detail. Afterward, in a press release, he observed, "What I saw last night was powerful in many ways. I listened, heard, and stood with protesters, and I saw what it means when the federal government unleashes paramilitary forces against its own people." Yes, it was a teachable moment for Mayor Ted, as so many acts of violent idiocy are supposed to be in this summer of social justice, a national struggle session a la Mao Zedong to re-educate the obtusely privileged multitudes to the insidious menace of systemic racism. How's it working? Well, those multitudes are taking it all in for sure, and perhaps concluding on their own that teacher moment is not exactly the same as a leadership moment, and that this phantom of systemic racism may not be all that it's cracked up to be. Anyway, Mayor Ted soon hurled his own thunderbolt at the feds, a citation for obstructing a city bike path by placing protective fences on it. There's leadership for you. Take that, Donald Trump, you big Hitler scheiss. Perhaps Mayor Ted is thinking his exemplary valor may put him in a position to replace the mentally disabled Democratic Party frontrunner, Joe Biden, as the nauseating talk of actually daring to nominate him approaches in just a few weeks, and if she whose turn was canceled stands aside. As for the Antifas, a tiny corner of one's moral sensibility must be reserved to pity their plight. Nobody can say for sure how many are drawn from the student body of nearby Portland State University, a hothouse of wokesterism, a few blocks from Riot Central, but I bet a lot of them. There, they have been rigorously trained in critical race theory, intersectionality, gender studies, and all the other preparations for a fruitful adulthood in wokesterdom. And now, alas, the diversity departments all over the land are not hiring. What to do? The global economy is in a tailspin from coronavirus, actually close to auguring clean into ground zero, and their services may not be required for anything. I'd be demoralized too were I 20 years old. To make matters worse, the cafes, craft beer joints, and twee little vegan lunch bars are shut down, along with the music halls and every other arts venue. And who has any money? Their intersectional bodies are roiling with youthful hormones with an assist from weed and other stimulants. What better way to work off all that energy on a warm summer night than to riot in the streets against a society that has actually prepared them for nothing except protesting the unfairness of life? But what's left of the real world of adults and stuff, though, there is the age-old question of public order. Evidently, the Democratic brand mayors and governors think they see a political advantage in chaos, the destruction of property, and bodily injury to citizens, including murder. What exactly was Mayor Ted Wheeler doing at the riot down on Portland's Federal Building on Wednesday night? Was he showing support for the action? Sure looked like it. And is it possible that Governor Kate Brown approves and encourages it too? She has not used the Oregon State Police to restore order. Maybe it's just time to bypass the game playing before any more people get hurt and charge these politicians with assisting insurrection under federal law, 18 U.S. Code 2383, and put them on trial in the same building that their Antifa mob is trying to burn down. Well, what Peter Turchin talks about, the overproduction of elites, that's been a serious problem in America and elsewhere in the Western world for quite some time, but particularly after the 2008 economic disaster. But it was clear that the surplus of capitalism, as I like to call it, was gone, and it wasn't coming back. The surplus of capitalism paid for gender studies, black studies, feminist studies, intersectional studies, all the rest of it. It paid for make-work jobs. It paid for performance art and all of these things. But that money is gone. And you see a society which has become wholly materialist, which disdains everything that is numinous, has to come up with the goods. And that became tenuous after 2008. And then when the economies were all shut down out of blind panic, suddenly materialism was not producing the goods anymore with the results that we see. Now, it's easier for societies that are based on things other than materialism to weather crises. You know, and I suppose in other countries, the Great Depression in the United States might have led to a revolution, but America was a much different country in the 1930s. Far more people believed in God, I mean, seriously believed in God, and there was more of an appreciation of the limits of human life. Now, apparently, we can have anything we want. And the only reason we don't have everything we want is because, Orange Man Bad has decided we can't. Since I've been in Victoria, I've been reunited with TV. And I mostly watch this channel, which I've talked about before, called Me TV, which specializes in shows from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Perry Mason, Twilight Zone, that kind of thing. It's all insurance ads. Almost every single ad is from some different insurance company. It's really remarkable. But Joe Biden has been running ads, and apparently Joe Biden is tested. He was tested by 2008. He led the Economic Recovery Act. Did you know that? And he's not going to give money away to corporations like Donald Trump. Oh, so Obama's administration didn't bail out, didn't make whole the very people who were directly responsible for the catastrophe. Also, apparently, Joe Biden had something to do with Ebola and stopping that. And apparently, he's going to put all Americans on a path to good jobs. Oh, this was always dodgy even before, COVID-19 panic destroyed the economy. How is that he's advertising to old people, to old boomers, like me, or who are even older than me, that if you elect Joe, everything's going to go back to the way that it was, I don't know when, in the 1970s, say? Is that the idea? He's going to wave his magic wand and America's going to return to the 1970s? Well, that's not going to happen. History moves forward. It doesn't move backwards. And of course, America is very much different from what it was in the 1970s. If you want to keep up with what's going on in Portland, again, I'll highly recommend my old friend Dennis Dale's blog, Untethered, which is dennisdale.blogspot.com. He lives in Portland. He's been out on the streets on a daily basis, with the video, handheld video. He posts live streams. And he writes, July 21st, Portland's insurrectionists are more numerous, organized, and energized as a result of President Trump's surge of federal law enforcement into the city, now on day 50-something of the siege of Soros, but who's counting? Contrary to Trump's claim, they have not restored order and haven't done, not necessarily their fault, a fine job. In fact, at this point, he's only managed to place the feds in the same untenable position the police have come to relieve they were in before, or the police they've come to relieve were in before. The force they need to use is used against them immediately and so far quite effectively by treacherous media and political leaders, presenting them as military atrocities to a benighted public. By the way, they keep the media and the Antifa pals, they're pretty much, the media Antifa, pretty much the same thing now. Pretty much the Democratic Party is Antifa. They keep saying that these federal officers are unidentified. They have patches on their shoulders, so they are identified. Trump and the poor grunts of federal law enforcement have acquired their own Vietnam. No, Johnny Rambo, you don't get to win this time either. After introducing harsher riot control measures, lots of tear gas and various munitions on the first two nights and putting Antifa on their heels, the feds have retreated to their fortified courthouse. They are now pursuing the same strategy of the police earlier, seeding the streets and only clearing rioters when their physical attacks on the building get out of hand, as when they try to set the plywood fortifications on fire. Last night, they managed to pull away a large section of plywood framing and start in on the exposed but impressively sturdy glass underneath. I'll just point out that they keep talking about peaceful protests. Now, again, as Kunstler mentioned, anyone with access to YouTube, the media isn't covering this, but anyone with access to YouTube knows that these are not peaceful protests. This is violent insurrection. And, if the media can get away with this, if the media can get away into turning night into day like this, bad things are ahead of us. Very, very bad things. Let's see. Yeah, the moms, the wall of moms. You may have heard that supposedly all these moms showed up to support Antifa in Portland and their insurrection. How do we know that they're moms, by the way? But this is from today. from Dennis's Twitter feed. An announcement from Wall of Moms. Today, we're pleased to announce the deepening of a powerful collaboration that will more firmly root us in our collective goals of ending racism, healing historic and ongoing wrongs, and doing the hard but much needed work of healing our society and world from the legacies of colonialism, racism, and white supremacy. Well, we started with the heart-centered and courageous goal of bringing mothers together to stand against fascism, racism, and authoritarianism. We quickly found ourselves in a problematic but predictable place. Too many of our group admins were white women. White women, don't you just hate them? Realizing that this was problematic, you already said it was problematic, we reached out to Teresa, with two S's, Rayford, and Don't Shoot PDX, who have long been doing the work in regards to addressing systemic racism and fighting for social change. Through the relationship we have built with Don't Shoot, we quickly realized that there is no context where white or non-Black women should be leading a group whose goal is liberation and justice for Black people. For this reason, we are eager to announce that all white group admins have relinquished their roles. Not one of our group admins struggled with decision, and all have chosen to stay on in powerful roles in service to the group and movement. Bev Barnum, Teresa Ryford, Demetria Hester, and Danielle James will now be the administrators of this group, so that our leadership is entirely composed of Black and Indigenous women from most impacted communities. In this moment, we ask for you to take time to both read this post, consider what skills you have to give, think about how you can participate without seeking rank or power, and welcome our new leadership. We deeply thank you for your service and for your faith in this movement. I get the impression, listening to these women, that they would actually become indentured servants to Black people if it were asked or demanded of them. They'd be grateful to do it. For how long, I wonder. U.S. agents have arrested 18 people in Portland this week, but there was a court decision, apparently, that this was illegal. The news of additional arrests came after a judge on Thursday blocked U.S. agents from arresting or using physical force against journalists and legal observers at protests in Oregon's largest city. This order is a victory for the rule of law, said Jan Carson, interim executive director of the ACLU of Oregon. I'm tempted to say that William Barr should repeat a variation of Andy Johnson's famous statement. Justice Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. Do these judges, do they have their own constabulary? Do they have their own Praetorian Guard? Because that's pretty much what it's come to now. It's pretty much what it's come to. I'm looking at a picture here of Portland Commissioner, that's what they call counselors, Joanne Hardesty. And she may be, indeed, more terrifying looking than Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago. She looks like a wraith. And according to Merriam-Webster, a wraith is the exact likeness of a living person seen usually just before death as an apparition. She has these braids, these tiny, stringy braids down the side of her head. She looks like a black Medusa. She, a few days ago, appeared to support the peaceful protesters and was filmed running in terror and actually tripping and falling on a Portland street. This is from the Daily Mail. Portland City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty apologized for claiming police are sending saboteurs to infiltrate anti-racism demonstrations to start fires that have lit up the city on many of the 56 consecutive nights of protests. No, not protests, riots. Hardesty's apology came amid continued civil unrest in Oregon's largest city. Just last night, federal agents hit Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler with tear gas after the elected official received an icy reception from protesters. Oh, by the way, Joanne Hardesty, of course, is not from Portland. She is from the lovely city of Baltimore, Maryland, which is a hellhole. But she moved to Portland and has been embraced by the people there in order, presumably, to turn Portland into another Baltimore. Baltimore being a city where no one with any money or any sense would want to live in. Oh, and I guess Seattle is feeling rather jealous now. They had their chop, their Chaz, but eventually the mayor, tired of this, after people started being raped and murdered. So let's see. This is from the New York Post. Rioters in Seattle. You see, I got to salute the Post for that. Rioters, not protesters. Rioters in Seattle busted out windows of a pot shop and scrawled gentrifier on it outside, according to a report. A group of 150 people gathered late Wednesday at Cal Anderson Park before busting out windows and starting a pair of fires on Capitol Hill. That's where the Chaz or Chop was, including inside a business that firefighters later extinguished. At another nearby business, Uncle Ike's, which bills itself as Seattle's favorite pot shop, protesters wrote the word gentrifier on the front of the building, which also had some of its windows smashed. The protesters then took aim at another storefront, breaking into Rove Village, where they stole merchandise before setting those items on fire in the middle of the street. Rove Vintage, meanwhile, is owned by the wife of one of the Seattle cops who fatally shot a pregnant black woman 3 years ago. 2 banks were also damaged, and another business at Broadway and Madison was also looted. No arrests were made, police said. The violence came after a federal judge ruled late Wednesday that he will allow a recent ordinance passed by Seattle City Council barring police from using tear gas and pepper spray during ongoing protests against police brutality to go into effect on Sunday. These people are, I don't know, they're cheering on their own destruction. Matt Walsh has a piece today. I looked up every case of an unarmed black man shot by cops in 2019. Here's the truth. The media and BLM are hiding. I have already made the claim that systemic racism in law enforcement is a myth. The claim that racist police are prowling the streets searching for black men to murder is absurd on its face, and even absurder when you look at the facts. It is now well publicized, at least in some corners, that despite all of the panicking and rioting over race-based police brutality, only a very small number of unarmed black men are killed by police each year. But an even closer look at the data, as a study of each unarmed killing, reveals that the real number of unjustified police shootings of actual unarmed people, black, white, or any other race, is much smaller still. First, to put the statistics into perspective, it's helpful to begin with the overall number of arrests. According to the Department of Justice, police make about 10 million arrests each year. As a rough average, 7 million of the arrested suspects are white and 3 million are black. Out of that number last year, 25 unarmed white people were killed by police compared to 14 unarmed black people. That means about 0.0004% of all blacks arrested were killed while unarmed. The percentage for whites is comparable. Now, the numbers aren't exactly the same every year, of course. I looked up all 14 cases included in the Washington Post's 2019 database. A few are straightforwardly unjustified, such as the case of Atatiana Jefferson, who was shot while sitting inside her mother's home. Officer Carmen DeCruz in Texas fatally shot a man called Michael Dean. Body cam footage apparently shows that DeCruz accidentally discharged his firearm while trying to confiscate Dean's car keys during a traffic stop. And then he goes through the list. And again, the question of what constitutes unarmed is something that is, let's say, problematic, you know. That these cases may count as unarmed in a strictly legal sense, but any news outlet interested in accurate reporting wouldn't use the term without careful qualification. This is what the media and BLM activists mean when they scream about the epidemic of unarmed black men killed by police. They mean that a very tiny fraction of black people arrested by police are killed in the process, and that an even tinier fraction are unarmed at the time, and that an even tinier fraction of that fraction of the fraction actually had no weapon of any kind and were making no attempt to hurt or kill a police officer. Now, of course, this column by Matt Walsh is not going to change anything because there's no arguing with the supporters of BLM or Antifa. But nevertheless, one must not repine. Louise Perry writes in Unheard on July 21st, reading the latest copy of the New Yorker magazine published exactly a week before, I came across this sentence in a piece by Jill Lepore. One study suggests that 2/3 of Americans between the ages of 15 and 34 who were treated in emergency rooms suffer from injuries inflicted by police and security guards, about as many people as the number of pedestrians injured by motor vehicles, unquote. This in a 5,000-word feature on the history of policing in the United States, which draws a link between the early role of police in suppressing slave rebellions and police killings of Black Americans in the 21st century. This sentence jumped out to me. How could it possibly be true that 2/3 of all Americans aged 15 to 34 visiting ER had been injured by police or security guards, given the very many other reasons people might present for emergency treatment? In the online version, there is no hyperlink to the research, although the article does contain hyperlinks, and the study's authors are not named. Jill Lepore could hardly be more eminent. She is a professor of American history at Harvard, the recipient of a long list of awards, and a long-standing staff writer at The New Yorker, as well as a contributor at many other well-regarded publications. I love her writing so much so that I bought several extra copies of her latest book, These Truths, to give as presents to friends and family. Given this, I thought at first that I might have misunderstood the sentence and tweeted as much. I sought out the study she was referring to and found it, a 2016 paper whose lead author, Justin Feldman, was a doctoral student at Harvard at the time. Soon after publication, the findings were described in a Harvard press release and also reported on by The Guardian. As it turns out, I was right. The 2/3 claim is not true, not even close. Lepore is right to draw a comparison between the rate of legal intervention injuries and the rate of pedestrians injured by motor vehicles, although this applied only to men aged 15 to 34. But it's not clear where Lepore got the 2/3 figure from. Possibly she misunderstood a line from the paper itself, which includes the finding that 61.1% of people injured by police fell into the 15 to 34 age bracket. So this is, so she checked with Feldman himself, who commented, oh, weird, the rate being the same as car accidents is true, but the other part is definitely not. I did my best to work out a rough estimate of the true proportion of 15 to 34-year-olds visiting the ER who had suffered legal intervention injuries and arrived at a figure of 0.2%. So I believe Lepore's claim to be off by a factor of several hundred. We know that political bias warps cognition, sometimes catastrophically, and this is, I think, an example of that in action. The staff of The New Yorker who read her piece also, we must assume, considered it to be plausible. The sentence was printed and as of the time of writing has not been corrected. There has been no uproar on social media. I reached out to both The New Yorker and Feldman for comment and have not received replies. Feldman's was a tweet in regard to something else. A small but troubling example of the effect of political bias on journalism. Well, I guess this is the year where we learned, as I stated last week, that the media is lying to you all the time. That's all they do to you. That, I believe it was earlier this week, I read out a large section from Angelo Codavia's outstanding essay on COVID, the public health response to it, that everything they've done is wrong. And that everything that the experts claimed is wrong, disastrously wrong, but it doesn't seem to matter. There's a piece of Politico today. 8 big reasons Election Day 2020 could be a disaster. Yeah. And what's happening here is that we are all being softened up. We are all being softened up for a situation whereby the Democrats steal the election quite openly, and Trump is told not to do anything about this because he's already intimated that he's not necessarily going to accept the results of the election. Or perhaps worse for the press, Trump wins again, but his election is held to be illegitimate, even more so than it was in 2016. And we will see, well, insurrection in the streets, perhaps not just in Portland, but in dozens or hundreds of American cities. This is from the News and Observer. A UNC, that's the University of North Carolina, Wilmington professor who was set to retire next month after a history of controversial social media posts was found dead in his home on Thursday afternoon. Deputies with the New Hanover County Sheriff's Office responded to the Wilmington home of Mike Adams to do a wellness check and found his body. Adams, a 55-year-old tenured criminology professor, was set to retire from UNCW on August 1st after reaching a settlement agreement with the university for more than $500,000. He sparked controversy at the university for more than a decade, particularly and most recently surrounding his comments on social media. UNCW officials did not respond to a phone call Thursday evening, but the school emailed the campus community. It is with sadness that we share the news, blah, blah, blah. His early retirement was announced last month after Adams was publicly criticized for tweets about Governor Roy Cooper's stay-at-home orders because of the coronavirus. In a May 28 tweet, Adams said universities shouldn't be closing, but that they should shut down, quote, the non-essential majors like women's studies, unquote. The next day, Adams tweeted, "This evening I ate pizza and drank beer with 6 guys at a 6-seat tabletop. I almost felt like a free man who was not living in the slave state of North Carolina, Massachusetts. Let my people go." Adams also tweeted about the individuals protesting the killing of George Floyd, saying that rioters were, quote, thugs looking for an opportunity to break the law with impunity, unquote. Multiple Change.org petitions with more than 120,000 signatures started circulating against Adams, and faculty, students, alumni, and celebrities demanded that the university get rid of him. The Chancellor, Jose Sartorelli, said the best way to resolve the issue quickly, with certainty, and in the most fiscally responsible way was to negotiate a settlement, which was done. So I suppose he committed suicide. I suppose it's possible he was murdered. Not likely. Let's see. Stacey Matthews, a conservative political blogger and regular contributor to Red State, who writes under the pseudonym Sister Tolja, wrote on Twitter, "This is awful, simply awful. Professor Mike Adams was a tireless defender of the First Amendment and conservative values. It was recently reported that he was retiring from UNCW, who gave him grief for years for his viewpoints." UNCW professor L.J. Randolph tweeted that people should mourn Adams' death, but don't sugarcoat his rhetoric as merely controversial or racially charged. He was blatantly racist, homophobic, and sexist. In his own words, left no room for interpretation on any of that. I suspect there were many thousands of people delighting in Adams' death on Twitter. I didn't do a search, but I suppose people like Adams must keep silent. They should not go on social media. But there's a difficulty there because silence used to mean consent. That's an ancient legal principle. Now, of course, various identity groups demand acclaim, constant acclaim. And so then I suppose anyone who is not an idiot who teaches at American University is in the position of Havel's greengrocer, that they're going to force themselves to go along with the woke mob. And this leads to difficulties because there's a tendency for people to internalize this. If you say something, if you say a lie enough times, you come to believe it, typically. So I suppose that idiots should simply stay away from the academy. We'll see how much of it is left after this COVID-19 panic finally plays out. Oh, and of course, Canada, which is the greatest copycat nation in the world, apparently the N-word was used at a CBC meeting. The people in the news department. Apparently, it was quotation from a book title, but one of the leading figures in Canadian journalism for decades, Wendy Mesley, well, she's done at the CBC now. And there's a story, a profile by three people. It took three people to write this: Katie Nicholson, Rob Ansel, and Jason Ho. When Dexter Brown began working at the CBC 4 years ago, it felt like home. I felt like I was giving back to Canada because as Canada's public broadcaster, it holds a special place in my heart. Brown lives near the CBC's downtown Toronto headquarters and still walks by sometimes, but he no longer goes inside. He now works at another network. Today, Brown is calling for change at the public broadcaster as he speaks out for the first time about his experience as a black man, hearing two colleagues at the Fifth Estate use the N-word in an editorial discussion in April 2019. He's coming forward as issues of race have shifted to the forefront of societal debate. Oh, it's a debate, is it? With the lack of diversity in the media under the microscope, is there a lack of diversity in the Canadian media? That has not been my experience. And recent revelations that the N-word was used on two occasions by CBC host Wendy Mesley during editorial meetings at The Weekly. Brown was working as an associate producer with the Fifth Estate, CBC's flagship investigative program, when the word was repeatedly used in a documentary about racial issues in the American South, screened for more than 30 people, including the show's leadership as well as CBC staff not affiliated with the show. Two longtime Fifth Estate employees then used the word in the staff discussion afterward, either quoting people in the item that had just been shown or when discussing its contents. I couldn't have ever imagined that would have happened, where somebody would have thought that it was okay to use that word, Brown said, disappointed with what took place and a bit embarrassed as well, being the only black person in the room. It's quite surreal. Yeah, it's surreal, but not in the way that you understand it, Mr. Brown. According to Brown and multiple accounts from other people who were in the room, no one was admonished for the use of the N-word at the time, and there was no discussion about it being used. After Brown later raised it with the show's executive producer and a human resources manager, the public broadcaster called in an external law firm to do an investigation that ran for months. When the investigation was complete, Brown says he was provided few details of how the matter was dissolved. It was a bit of a letdown. I was hoping to get a better understanding of what happened, why it happened. Several senior CBC executives approached for comment, declined interview request, offering instead a written statement, who said, while we would not be commenting on details pertaining to this matter, we can confirm there was a comprehensive investigation conducted by a third-party investigator. We can also confirm there were findings from the investigation and corrective actions were taken. We have a strong senior leadership team in place, and there is a renewed commitment to ensuring CBC is a safe, inclusive, and supportive workplace. The public broadcaster recently expanded its diversity and inclusion goals, announcing that by fiscal 2021 to 22, half of all new hires for executive and senior management positions will be Indigenous people, visible minorities, or people with disabilities. Yeah, that's a little more than affirmative action, I'm afraid, because these people are not yet a majority in my country. The corporation said retention and promotion rates from people from these three groups will be doubled, and unconscious bias training will be mandatory for leaders. In other words, if they screw up, they won't be fired. They will be promoted instead. Oh, and let's go into this into exhausting detail. The use of the N-word Brown witnessed. Did I mention that word surreal? Did that come up just a day or two, or sorry, a few minutes ago? It took place April 16th, 2019. I'm surprised they don't give us the time, at 3:39 p.m. As the Fifth Estate team was preparing for a new season under newly appointed executive producer Catherine Legg. The discussion involved looking at different styles of documentaries. The editorial screened one titled Murder in Mississippi that was part of a series called Love and Hate Crime. Brown said there was no warning to staff before the screening about the racial slur they would hear. The N-word was used a dozen times in the documentary in 911 calls and trial testimony, and by a white woman who insisted it had no racial connotation. Sources who were present at the screening say two Fifth Estate employees, host Gillian Findlay and editor Loretta Hicks, used the N-word in staff discussions about the documentary immediately following its screening. So this is a CBC story, reporting about the CBC, and now it appears that Gillian Findlay, Loretta Hicks, and Catherine Legg they have all been thrown under the bus. So I suppose if you value any kind of loyalty to your employees, then CBC is not a good place to work. National News Watch, Canadian Drudge. It's more like a deep state Canadian Drudge with stuff from the IRPP, Policy Options, which is a government-funded, supposedly independent body which churns out reliably left-wing opinions. That's all it churns out. Well, Mohi Tabara shares these stark figures and calls for a paradigm shift. Are people still using that? To eliminate systemic racism. So I read his article, and there is no discussion of, for instance, systemic racism. Okay, how do blacks, how well do they get along, succeed elsewhere in the world? Say in the United States, or in Britain, or in France, or Germany, or in Italy, say. No, none of that. Because that would have been embarrassing, because it would reveal that the situation in those countries is very, very similar to the situation in Canada. And it's deprivation. It's deprivation that's responsible for crime. And of course, I was reminded by a song from West Side Story, lyrics by Stephen Sondheim. Well, this is from 1957, and smart people saw through this right from the beginning. The song is called Gee, Officer Krupke. I responded to the IRPP. According to the essay, blacks and indigenous, quote, rely on more criminalized behavior as a form of subsistence, unquote. In other words, they have no moral agency. They're simply depraved on account they're deprived. You know, assaulting people, how shooting people, stabbing people, how exactly does that, what does that have to do with subsistence? Again, this is the Les Miserables myth that AOC was peddling last week. They're stealing bread to feed their families. Get woke, go broke. From the Wall Street Journal, A&E has lost half of its viewers since dropping Live PD. Network's primetime viewership was up 4% this year before it canceled its hit police reality show. It was the most popular show on cable television. But if you're going to show, typical day of police officers in the United States, they're going to be arresting a lot of black people. Average primetime viewership for A&E between June 11th and July 19th was 498,000, down 49% from the same period last year. Which reminds me that this is opening day for Major League Baseball. And I'm very much conflicted about this because I love baseball. I've loved it since I was a little boy. Mickey Mantle woke. That, the first game, everyone was kneeling. Everyone was kneeling. And, let's see, the Tampa Bay's, the official Twitter account of today is opening day, which means it's a great day to arrest the killers of Breonna Taylor. Well, I'm sure you're familiar with the meme. And the sainted Dr. Anthony Fauci, and it was highly amusing. It suggests that he has perhaps a very serious visual problem. This may be the worst pitch that I have ever seen in this celebrity situation. I mean, it doesn't. You just have to aim at the catcher. How is it? That old Bob Uecker joke? Just a little bit outside. This is what? It's about 7 or 8 feet. Off the plate. I was speaking earlier this week about Canadian rap star Tory Lanez. That's not his real name. His real name is something Daystar, Anthony Daystar, something like that. He also calls himself Argentina Far. But he was in this contretemps with the big-assed female rapper, Megan Thee Stallion. and I've read some pieces about Megan the Stallion, is just as tough as the guys. Well, she got shot twice a few days ago. Let's see, this is from Hot New Hip Hop. Meg violated his ass. I don't really know what that means because he showed. Is that really how black people talk? Because he showed Kylie Jenner too much attention at a house party. With everything happening in hip hop right now, yeah, it's just no one's paying attention to to COVID or Black Lives Matter because there's so much going on in the world of hip hop. It's insane to think we still have no clue what happened between Tory Lanez and Megan the Stallion. Their incident was brought up again when Drea Michelle made an insensitive joke about Megan's shooting, claiming that she wants someone to love her so much that they shoot her too. Yeah, apparently, the story goes that she was walking away from the car, and Tory Lanez, aka Argentina Fargo, was brandishing his gun at the window, and then accidentally, there were two accidental discharges. But we see with this action that Tory Lanez has gained the much needed, the necessary, the required street cred. And there's no better way to acquire street cred in the rap hip hop community than to shoot someone. What I'm hearing, says Adam22, I don't know who Adam22 is, but never mind. What I'm hearing, my version that I've heard from trusted sources is that Megan and Tory have been, well, let's say doing it. They've been chilling. They go to this house party. Kylie Jenner is there. I heard, depending on who you want to ask, that either Tory was showing too much attention to Kylie Jenner or Kylie Jenner was showing too much attention to Tory. Either way, Meg did not appreciate it. Meg, maybe at this point in her career, has a little bit of an ego. She's feeling herself, and she feels that she doesn't have to deal with any disrespect. Meg was violating his ass. They got into a fight that was, like, bad. I heard she was really shitting on him. It was bad. Kylie Jenner was claiming some months ago to be a billionaire. It turns out that that's not true, not even close. But she is a rich person. And I would have thought one of the advantages of being a rich person is that you do not have to hang out with the likes of Tory Lanez and Megan the Stallion. But life is full of surprises, as I like to say. Toby Young reports in Lockdown Skeptics. So today is Mask Day, a new low in the lockdown era. But rather than depress readers by linking to the BBC's ridiculously upbeat guide to face coverings, I thought I'd confine myself to a few glimmers of hope. For instance, supermarkets and coffee shops have said they won't enforce the new rules. These include Sainsbury's, Asda, and Costa Coffee, these are three very big companies in Britain. In addition, the Director of Public Affairs at Co-op has said it isn't the job of the supermarket's change employees to enforce the rules, and the Association of Convenience Stores has advised its members not to challenge any customers without face coverings. Yeah, this is almost unbelievable, even in this, well, surreal year. Determined not to be outdone by England's draconian mask rules, the Welsh government has gone one step further. According to its recent public transport guidance, not only will travelers have to wear face masks from July the 27th, they won't be able to chat on the phone, eat or drink, must remain in relative silence, and cannot read newspapers. Who knew reading newspapers could spread the virus? Oh, and you're not allowed to run for the bus because the virus can be transmitted by breathing heavily. I noted a couple of weeks ago in this space that I saw a sign at a bus stop. It says that everyone has to wear masks. And I went for a very long walk on Sunday, several miles. And then I was going to walk home, and then I thought, yeah, okay, I'm not wearing a mask. Not wearing a mask. And I got on the bus, and I wasn't wearing a mask, and I paid the money, and the bus driver didn't say anything, and there were people on the bus wearing masks, and some people were not wearing masks. So it's crazy here in Victoria, outside of London Drugs, I saw 8 people waiting in line to enter the store, and I thought, are we still doing this? It's almost the end of July, and we're still doing this, even though there is no one dying of COVID-19 in BC, and the total number of deaths is, 185 in a province of 5.1 million. It's, yeah. Toby Young also reports in a recent Prospect webinar in which Lord Sumption admitted to breaking lockdown rules. The patron saint of lockdown skeptics also criticized Britain's human rights organizations for being extraordinarily silent on the government's wholesale suspension of our liberties. Yeah, in fact, they are supporting it. In fact, they are supporting it because the civil liberties organizations, for the most part, have simply become, well, let's say that they've become Antifa adjacent. Let's put it that way. More under 25-year-olds died from influenza in 16 weeks in 2014 to 15 than COVID-19 this year. But I guess, you know, the teachers are too scared. They're too scared to go back to school. The data is pretty startling. For instance, it shows that more under 49-year-olds died of suicide and injury or poisonings in a typical 16-week period in 2018 than COVID in 2020. And fewer under 25-year-olds have died from COVID than from road traffic accidents in a typical 16-week period in previous years. And this from the Telegraph: people with treatable cancers will die due to government scaremongering, warns NHS nurse. Curious situation. He talks about dodgy data. That a reader sent him this, a lecturer in neuroscience actually. I noticed that COVID hospital admissions in Wales are not falling as one might expect, while those in Scotland have dropped to 0. Currently, COVID admissions to hospitals in Wales are running at a similar level to those in England, which is strange given the very different populations and reported deaths. And there are 2 possible explanations. One is that Scotland has a particularly debilitating and long-lasting form of the virus, while Wales has a very short-acting one. On the other hand, Occam would suggest that COVID admissions and patients are being counted differently in the 2 nations. I suspect that Wales is counting anyone arriving at hospital with an elevated temperature and cough as a COVID admission, but only counting patients with a positive COVID test. In contrast, Scotland seems to be significantly undercounting admissions, perhaps by only including patients who arrive with a positive COVID test. I'm sure that it is a complete coincidence that these happen to play into the particular political narratives of the first 2 ministers. Sturgeon, that's Scotland's line, is COVID has been banished, but we may have to close the border to keep it out. And Drakeford, that's Wales' line, is COVID is much, much worse over here, so we have to keep everything shut. Let's see what Alex. Oh, yes, this is very, very funny. So I mentioned the sainted Dr. Fauci. And, okay, so if I turn this way, the Blue Jays are playing Tampa Bay. And it's in the hideous indoor park in St. Petersburg, Florida, and it's empty because no fans allowed. When they had the riots in Baltimore, when was that? 2016. The Baltimore Orioles played a game, a regularly scheduled season game, in an empty park because it was thought it was too dangerous to allow people in the park, and I thought that was shocking. That was a sign that, you know, a corner had been turned. Now, no fans allowed. However, here is Dr. Fauci sitting in the stands in the Washington Stadium, the Washington National Stadium, and there's a man to the right of him, and there is a woman to the left of him, and they are wearing masks. He has pulled his mask down, and there's no social distancing because they're in adjacent seats. How about that? How about that? Alex Berenson says, and there's Dr. Anthony Fauci showing us all he knows, exactly how well masks work. Thanks for the lesson, Doc. yeah, let's see. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Youngins off my lawn. Only folks over 70 may watch baseball or be outside without masks. It's called the golden age for a reason. New England Journal of Medicine letter to come. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Let's see. I was going to talk about Michael Polanyi and moral inversion, but I've got the book club starting in a few minutes, and I spent about half an hour talking about my personal situation at the top of the show. So I will do that instead on Monday. And I'll get back. There have been more developments in the classical music is racism. One of the fellows who was leading the charge, who is not a journalist working for the New York Times or the Washington Post, is someone called Nebel Masoud, and he is introduced as an award-winning queer Lebanese Druze composer based in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Whenever I see that form of address, I decide I'm not interested in what this person has to say. Oh, you're a lesbian single mother. How is that relevant to the point that you are trying to make? You're a disabled immigrant, whatever. Oh, why? You're genderqueer, body positive. Again, I'm not interested. I'm simply not interested. But I will talk about that as well on Monday. So let's get back to the chat. Have a look at the chat before I go to the book club. William Hicks says, when they went to replay challenges and they got rid of the 4-pitch intentional walks, I was on the fence. Now I'm out. No more Major League Baseball except for the classic stuff online. This decision to get rid of the 4-pitch intentional walks is a very bad decision, because typically teams give up intentional walks when they're in trouble. And each toss to the catcher who steps, away from the batter's box, it ratchets up the tension. Now, you can watch a lot of baseball games where they're blowouts from the beginning and there's no tension. So here was a genuine tension-inducing moment, and they decided to get rid of it. There's also the small possibility, and I've seen this happen, where the pitcher he messes up the throw. He does a Fauci, one might say, or the catcher botches the catch, and the batter runs off for third base. Replay challenges. I'm not a fan, but on the other hand, I just become increasingly irritated with the notion of umpires having their own strike zone. When they allowed broadcasters of baseball to put the strike zone right on the screen as the game is in progress, and later to show you exactly where the pitch, when it went over the plate, where it was, then these umpires with their strike zones, here's a pitch that's 1 foot off the plate, but I'm going to call it a strike because I have a very expansive strike zone. Well, I don't think that they can get away with doing both. Either they have to, rein the umpires in, or get rid of the gadgetry that allows us to actually see whether the pitch is a ball or a strike. Aslan says they love to go on shooting spree at funerals. Yes, when was this? In Chicago? At a funeral? How many people were shot? Was it 13, 14 people were shot, mourners, at a funeral? Who takes a gun to a funeral? Well, I could ask similar questions, such as who takes guns to baptisms and children's birthday parties? Tweety Bird says, try looking at the People's Pundit, one of the very few pollsters who accurately predicted the 2016 election, Richard Barris. Shogokin666 says, my rap name is Dakota Machiavelli. The whole Machiavelli thing, the rappers got into that about, 10 or 15 years ago? Maybe they think Machiavelli was a member of the mafia. Contracu says it's no coincidence that all the major polling services were so wrong in the lead up to the 2016 election. They were on the take for Hillary. How you can have forgotten this is beyond me. They do this kind of rolling polling where, oh no, we got it right. You got it right what? You got it right on 8 p.m. on election night? It's a similar thing that you've seen with COVID. Oh, that our predictions were right. You're constantly changing your predictions of number of cases, numbers of death. And when that doesn't work, you change the meaning of what a case actually means. Alex DeLarge says a lot of pollsters have abandoned turnout models together. Polls have become a plague. The purpose of polls is to manufacture consent. I seriously think that perhaps they should be banned, certainly during election periods, because they lead people into an expectation that things are going to happen. That I don't need, there's no point in me voting for this character because he's not going to win. And this is wrong. I don't know, I would be hard pressed to quantify what the news value of, or the speech value, more to the point, of a poll is. Hauper says, I'm riding with Biden, I roll with Uncle Joe. Aslan says, then banning of yoga pants and encouraging looser clothing on fatties. Teachers are afraid to return because of their own health, KMG, says Alex DeLarge. There's no evidence that children can pass on COVID-19 to their teachers. How many teachers die of influenza every year? If the authorities give on this, then maybe teachers will never return to the classroom, because if any of you have, if you have children, perhaps you remember when you were a child yourself, children are always getting colds, always getting the flu. There's people coughing, sneezing, or whatever, spreading mucus and, death through liquid particles. Schools, like hospitals, are unhealthy places. That's the way it's always been. Jules Roy says, I refuse to watch the English Premier League now following the kneeling. Italian Serie A only for me. Yeah, and then you've got to look at the so-called Italian soccer players. My Trail of Disgrace says, stallion is not an appropriate nom de plume for a woman, even a gangsta type. No, but come on. Try to be kind. You wouldn't really expect her to know what a stallion is, would you? Matt Forney, hi Matt, says KMG, many European countries have an election silence period where polls are banned and campaigning is illegal. As our news stories beyond generic people are voting stories. Canada has that. I think it's a day, 1 day or 2 days before the election. They also ban Canada has 4.5 time zones, and they moved up the deadline for voting. But even so, all of the out here on the Pacific Coast, we can't hear the results from the Atlantic provinces and Quebec, except that it's reported in the American news, and so you can get it that way. Oh, my final comment on this before I move to the book club is that there are two schools of thought on Americans. America, the first results come in Pacific time about 4 o'clock, and that some people will not vote for their candidate because they believe that the early results show that he will not win. This is countered with the argument that some people will not vote for the winning candidate because they feel that their vote is not needed because his election is assured. Matt Forney says, Gaelic football is a pretty good sport. The fact that players, managers, etc. work as volunteers keep the corporate influence minimized. Matt Forney says, in Gaelic football is more interesting to watch than soccer. I don't know whether there's any soccer fans here. I did a podcast a few years ago basically ranting on how much I hate soccer. No, sorry, I apologize. It's not soccer, football. No, I can't stand it. Anyway, let us get to the book club and our book today. Oh, I should say, obviously, there's no theater Thursday this week. I will be talking next Thursday about the movie that I should have talked about yesterday, which is William Peter Blatty's The Ninth Configuration. G.K. Chesterton, Gilbert Keith Chesterton, was a example of a vanished type in British society or in Western society. He was a man of letters who was not only a household name, he played a significant role in many important debates in Britain for decades. He lived from 1874 to 1936. He was educated at the Slade School of Art, and he did not attend university. He is often compared to Hilaire Belloc. They were allies, but I would say that their attitudes are very different. Belloc was half French, as his name indicates, and he was a far more, how would you say, a pugilistic fellow than Chesterton was. Chesterton delighted in paradox. There are many, well, hundreds of examples. So here's my favorite: that there is an old saying, "If something's worth doing, it's worth doing well." Chesterton turned it on its head and said, "If something is worth doing, it's worth doing badly," which is true. Let's look at, say, child rearing. What is the assumption that, everyone who has a child, mothers and fathers, are all going to be experts? They're all going to do a outstanding job of raising their children? No, they're not. It's not required to have any expertise to give birth to children and to raise them, and neither should there be. And it is true that if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Just to give you some more information about Chesterton before I start talking about the book, Dale Alquist is the head of the Chesterton Society, and he has a little introduction to him here. Chesterton cannot be summed up in one sentence nor in one paragraph. In fact, in spite of the fine biographies that have been written of him, he has never been captured between the covers of one book. But rather than waiting to separate the goats from the sheep, let's come right out and say it. G.K. Chesterton was the best writer of the 20th century. He said something about everything, and he said it better than anyone else. But he was no mere wordsmith. He was very good at expressing himself, but more importantly, he had something very good to express. The reason he was the greatest writer of the 20th century was because he was also the greatest thinker of the 20th century. In 1900, he was asked to contribute a few magazine articles on art criticism and went on to become one of the most prolific writers of all time. He wrote 100 books, contributions to 200 more, hundreds of poems, including the epic Ballad of the White Horse, also the epic Lepanto, 5 plays, 5 novels, and some 200 short stories, including a popular series featuring the priest detective Father Brown. In spite of his literary accomplishments, he considered himself primarily a journalist, or a hack. He was not ashamed to use that term. He wrote over 4,000 newspaper essays, including 30 years' worth of weekly columns for the Illustrated London News and 13 years of weekly columns for the Daily News. He also edited his own newspaper, GK's Weekly. To put it into perspective, 4,000 essays is the equivalent of writing an essay a day every day for 11 years. If you're not impressed, try it sometime. But they have to be good essays, all of them, as funny as they are serious, and as readable and rewarding a century after you've written them. Chesterton was equally at ease with literary and social criticism, history, politics, economics, philosophy, and theology. His style is unmistakable, always marked by humility, consistency, paradox, wit, and wonder. His writing remains as timely and as timeless today as when it first appeared, even though much of it was published in throwaway papers. The man who composed such profound and perfect lines as the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried. Cigar in his mouth and walked around wearing a cape and a crumpled hat, tiny glasses pinched to the end of his nose, sword stick in hand, laughter blowing through his mustache. I should mention that Chesterton's oeuvre, if you will, is distinguished by, well, his book, The Everlasting Man, about Jesus Christ, perennial bestseller, his book, Orthodoxy. But he wrote critical studies of Browning and Charles Dickens and many other writers. When one talks about his versatility in terms of a writer, I'm thinking that it is pretty much unmatched by any other writer than I can think of. The only thing that would appear to be missing would be, say, opera libretti. Now, the Napoleon of Notting Hill, which was published in 1904, is Chesterton's first novel. And it is, I suppose you could say that it is a science fiction novel because it's set in 1984. But one of the conceits of the book is that in terms of technology, very little has changed. That the London of 1984 is very similar indeed to the London of 1904. So Chesterton starts writing during the era of the Yellow Book, the era of the aesthetes, of the decadence. And Chesterton's work, in this novel in particular, is a riposte to this, how would you say, effete and epicene style that was so popular at the time. Chesterton was unabashedly a romantic, and this is an exceedingly romantic novel. It is a anti-globalist novel, very prescient in these days, and it is founded on the belief that small is beautiful. Now it begins with a dedication to none other than Hilaire Belloc, with a poem, and I will read it. For every tiny town or place, God made the stars especially. Babies look up with owlish face and see them tangled in a tree. You saw a moon from Sussex Downs, a Sussex moon untraveled still. I saw a moon that was the town's, the largest lamp on Campden Hill. Yea, heaven is everywhere at home, the big blue cap that always fits, and so it is. Be calm, they come to go at last, my wandering wits. So is it with the heroic thing. This shall not end for the world's end, and though the sullen engines swing, be you not much afraid, my friend. This did not end by Nelson's urn where an immortal England sits, nor where your tall young men in turn drank death like wine at Austerlitz. And when the pedants bade us mark with cold mechanic happenings must come, our souls said in the dark, be like, but there are likelier things. Likelier across these flats afar, these sulky levels smooth and free, the drums shall crash, a waltz of war, and death shall dance with liberty. Likelier the barricades shall blare, slaughter below and smoke above, and death and hate and hell declare that men have found a thing to love. Far from your sunny upland set, I saw the dream, the streets I trod, the lit straight streets shot out and met, the starry streets that point to God. This legend of an epic hour, a child I dreamed, and dream it still under the great gray water tower that strikes the stars on Campden Hill. Chesterton was a Londoner, born and bred, whereas Hilaire Belloc, his great love was Surrey. And Chesterton wrote several celebrated poems about Surrey and his love of it, My Own Country being the most famous. It was set to music by the composer Peter Warlock. Very beautiful song indeed. So in this London of the future, democracy has, well, withered away, shall we say. And they still have a king, but the king is chosen in alphabetical order. And we meet three men. We meet a very strange man called Oberon Quinn, and we meet his two friends. And Oberon Quinn is, I suppose, kind of a trickster character. He's a strange, sort of deeply cynical man. And there is an important scene near the beginning of the book, which I will read to you, which takes place in a London restaurant. And there is a strange man that they meet, and there is Quinn and his two friends, Barker and Lambert. So the stranger says, "I beg yours also, Signor. I was wondering whether any of you had any read about you." Any read about us? Well, really, no, I don't think I have. I used to carry a red bandana once, but Barker, said Oberon Quinn suddenly, "where's your red cockatoo? Where's your red cockatoo?" "What do you mean?" asked Barker desperately. "What cockatoo? You've never seen me with any cockatoo." "I know," said Oberon, vaguely mollified. "Where's it been all the time?" Barker swung round, not without resentment. "I'm sorry, sir," he said shortly but civilly. "None of us seem to have anything red to lend you. But why, if one may ask?" "I thank you, Signor. It is nothing. I can, since there is nothing else, fulfill my own requirements." And standing for a second of thought with the penknife in his hand, he stabbed his left palm. The blood fell with so full a stream that it struck the stones without dripping. The foreigner pulled out his handkerchief and tore a piece from it with his teeth. The rag was immediately soaked in scarlet. "Since you are so generous, Signor," he said, "another pin, perhaps." Lambert held one out, with eyes protruding like a frog's. The red linen was pinned beside the yellow paper, and the foreigner took off his hat. "I have to thank you all, gentlemen," he said, and wrapping the remainder of the handkerchief round his bleeding hand, he resumed his walk with an overwhelming stateliness. While all the rest paused in some disorder, little Mr. Oberon Quinn ran after the stranger and stopped him, with hat in hand. Considerably to everybody's astonishment, he addressed him in the purest Spanish. "Senor," he said in that language, "pardon a hospitality perhaps indiscreet, towards one who appears to be a distinguished but a solitary guest in London. Will you do me and my friends, with whom you have had some conversation, the honor of lunching with us at the adjoining restaurant?" The man in the green uniform had turned a fiery color of pleasure at the mere sound of his own language, and he accepted the invitation with that profusion of bows which so often shows, in the case of the southern races, the falsehood of the notion that ceremony has nothing to do with feeling. "Senor," he said, "your language is my own, but all my love for my people shall not lead me to deny to yours the possession of so chivalrous an entertainer. Let me say that the tongue is Spanish, but the heart English." And he passed with the rest into Psiconanes. "Now, perhaps," said Barker, over the fish and sherry, intensely polite, but burning with curiosity, "perhaps it would be rude of me to ask why you did that." "Did what, Signor?" asked the guest, who spoke English quite well, though in a manner indefinably American. "Well," said the Englishman in some confusion, "I mean, tore a strip off hoarding and cut yourself, and—" "I tell you that, Signor," answered the other, with a certain sad pride, "involves merely telling you who I am. I am Juan del Fuego, President of Nicaragua." The manner in which the President of Nicaragua leant back and drank his sherry showed that to him this explanation covered all the facts observed and a great deal more. Barker's brow, however, was still a little clouded. "And the yellow paper?" he began, with anxious friendliness, "and the red rag?" "The yellow paper and the red rag," said Fuego, with indescribable grandeur, "are the colors of Nicaragua." "But Nicaragua," began Barker, with great hesitation, "Nicaragua is no longer a—" "Nicaragua has been conquered like Athens. Nicaragua has been annexed like Jerusalem," cried the old man, with amazing fire. "The Yankee and the German and the brute powers of modernity have trampled it with the hooves of oxen. But Nicaragua is not dead. Nicaragua is an idea." "Yes," said the foreigner, snatching at the word. "You are right, generous Englishman. An idea brilliant. A burning thought. Signor, you ask me why, in my desires to see the colors of my country, I snatched at paper and blood. Can you not understand the ancient sanctity of colors? The church has her symbolic colors, and think of what colors mean to us. Think of the position of one like myself, who can see nothing but those two colors, nothing but the red and the yellow. To me, all shapes are equal, all common and noble things are in a democracy of combination. Wherever there is a field of marigolds and the red cloak of an old woman, there is Nicaragua. Wherever there is a field of poppies and a yellow patch of sand, there is Nicaragua. Wherever there is a lemon and red sunset, there is my country. Whenever I see a red pillar box and a yellow sunset, there my heart beats. Blood and a splash of mustard can be my heraldry. If there be yellow mud and red mud in the same ditch, it is better to me than white stars. He says later, I'm quite fully aware that the whole tendency of the world of today is against Nicaragua and against me. I shall not consider it any diminution of your evident courtesy if you say what you think of the misfortunes that have laid my republic in ruins. And Barker says, I will take advantage of your generosity to express the doubts, which I must confess we moderns have about such things as the Nicaraguan independence. So your sympathies are, said Del Fuego quite calmly, with the big nation which, pardon me, President, said Barker warmly. My sympathies are with no nation. You misunderstand, I think, the modern intellect. We do not disapprove of the fire and extravagance of such commonwealths as yours, only to become more extravagant on a larger scale. We do not condemn Nicaragua because we think Britain ought to be more Nicaraguan. We do not discourage small nationalities because we wish large nationalities to have all their smallness, all their uniformity of outlook, all their exaggeration of spirit. If I differ with the greatest respect from your Nicaraguan enthusiasm, it is not because a nation or 10 nations were against you, it is because civilization was against you. We moderns believe in a great cosmopolitan civilization, one which shall include all the talents of the absorbed people. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Isn't that the creed of globalism? One world, one people, one culture. Well, as it turns out, Oberyn Quinn becomes king. And it would seem that this strange conversation with the president of Nicaragua has had quite an effect on Quinn, who is a eccentric fellow, to put it mildly. And so he decides that he is going to resurrect all of the old cities of London, and they are going to be republics, and they are going to have walls built around them with guards, and he's going to bring back ancient styles of dress for them. And I suppose the reader has a question whether Quinn is, let's say, mad, or whether this is an entirely cynical gesture, the sort of thing a bored man would come up with. But it turns out that the king has an interaction with a child who's playing at soldiers. And this child is from Notting Hill. And it has a profound effect on this boy called Adam Wayne. And he takes this to heart. The idea of Notting Hill being its own country. Enter a lunatic, chapter 3. They carried a yellow banner with a great red lion named by the king as the Notting Hill emblem after a small public house in the neighborhood which he once frequented. Between the two lines of his followers there advanced towards the king a tall, red-haired young man with high features and bold blue eyes. He would have been called handsome, but that a certain indefinable air of his nose being too big for his face and his feet for his legs gave him a look of awkwardness and extreme youth. His robes were red, according to the king's heraldry, and alone among the provosts he was girt with a great sword. This was Adam Wayne, the intractable provost of Notting Hill. The king flung himself back in his chair and rubbed his hands. What a day, he said to himself. Now there'll be a row. I'd no idea. It would be so much fun as it is. These provosts are so very indignant, so very reasonable, so very right. This fellow, by the look in his eyes, is even more indignant than the rest. No sign in those large blue eyes, at any rate, of ever having heard of a joke. He'll remonstrate with the others, and they'll remonstrate with him, and they'll all make themselves sumptuously happy, remonstrating with me. Welcome, my lord, he said aloud. What news from the hill of 100 legends? What have you for the ear of your king? I know that troubles have arisen between you and these others, our cousins, but these troubles it shall be your pride to compose. And I doubt not, and cannot doubt, that your love for me is not less tender, no less ardent than theirs. Mr. Buck made a bitter face, and James Barker's nostrils curled. Wilson began to giggle faintly, and the provost of West Kensington followed in a smothered way. But the big blue eyes of Adam Wayne never changed, and he called out in an odd, boyish voice down the hall, I bring homage to my king. I bring him the only thing I have, my sword. And with a great gesture, he flung it down on the ground and knelt on one knee behind it. There was a dead silence. I beg your pardon, said the king blankly. You speak well, sire, said Adam Wayne, as you ever speak when you say that my love is not less than the love of these. Small would it be, if not more, for I am the heir of your scheme, the child of the great charter. I stand here for the rights the charter gave me, and I swear by your sacred crown that where I stand fast. The eyes of all 5 men stood out of their heads. Then Buck said in his jolly, jarring voice, Is the whole world mad? The king sprang to his feet, and his eyes blazed. Yes, he cried in a voice of exultation, the whole world is mad, but Adam Wayne and me. It is true as death what I told you long ago, James Barker. Seriousness sends men mad. You are mad because you care for politics, as mad as a man who collects tram tickets. Buck is mad because he cares for money, as mad as a man who lives on opium. Wilson is mad because he thinks himself right, as mad as a man who thinks himself God Almighty. The provost of West Kensington is mad because he thinks he is respectable, as mad as a man who thinks he is a chicken. All men are mad but the humorist, who cares for nothing and possesses everything. I thought there was only one humorist in England. Fools, dolts, open your cow's eyes. There are 2. In Notting Hill, in that unpromising elevation, there has been born an artist. You thought to spoil my joke and bully me out of it by becoming more and more modern, more and more practical, more and more bustling and rational. Oh, what a feast it was to answer you by becoming more and more august, more and more gracious, more and more ancient and mellow. But this lad has seen how to bowl me out. He has answered me back, vaunt for vaunt, rhetoric for rhetoric. He has lifted the only shield I cannot break, the shield of an impenetrable pomposity. Listen to him. You have come, my lord, about Pump Street. You see, the other boroughs have decided that a great thoroughfare is to be run through Notting Hill, and it is to devastate lowly Pump Street. Adam Wayne is a highly romantic young man, and he has, to him, Pump Street is like a paradise. You know, he sees wrought iron railings, and he sees nobility and magnificence in them. Everything about his neighborhood is grand and magnificent. And to the great amusement of King Oberon, and to the horror and anger of the other provosts and the business interests, Wayne has decided that he will fight for Notting Hill, and he will fight for Pump Street. And he faces intractable odds on many occasions, but he is exceedingly brave and foolhardy, and he has managed to rally, I don't know, a few hundred people from Notting Hill to serve as his army, and they fight as old-fashioned armies did, with spears and swords. And I won't spoil it for you. It was hinted at the poem, the dedication. But Wayne engineers a magnificent coup in the battle against seemingly all the other boroughs of London. You see, King Oberon, this was a malicious joke of his. We see from the beginning of this novel that he's constantly exasperating his friends by examples of his humor, which are not humor at all. It's, I don't know, we've seen this in recent years, you know, with these so-called post-comedians and Oberyn Quinn was a post-comedian avant la lettre. But he is at first captivated by Adam Wayne because here is a young man foolish enough or stupid enough to have taken him seriously. But when it becomes obvious to everyone, including the king, that this is no joke to Adam Wayne and that he is prepared to fight to the death for Notting Hill, and there are hundreds in Notting Hill prepared to fight to the death and take as many people with them as necessary, then the mood of the novel changes, becomes very different, because we have been tempted to treat the whole business as a farce, and it is very far from a farce. That Chesterton is making the argument in this novel that if a man is not willing to fight for his own neighborhood, then what is he willing to fight for? What does he believe in? Does he have any beliefs at all? The conversation with the president of Nicaragua, oh no, it's all one world now, and everyone will be sublimated. All the talents will be sublimated. Well, this was anathema to Chesterton. And I have to say that this is a thrilling and moving novel. People who are not familiar with the vernacular of, say, turn of the century England may find it a bit of a slog for, I don't know, the first few pages, but you get used to it soon enough. Suffice to say that people spoke more clearly, certainly more fulsomely, and at greater length then than they do now. They also wrote in the same manner. That when one looks at Chesterton's achievement in the world of letters, one of the things that really stands out is his imagination. I could mention another novel in this respect, The Man Who Was Thursday, which is really quite astonishing. But those are my thoughts about the Napoleon of Notting Hill. Let's go back to the chat. Matt Forney says to Bob Paxson, I kept quiet on the alt-right stupidity out of respect for my friends still in it, but changed after Charlottesville because it was too obvious to ignore. Yeah, that's where I decided that myself that this alt-right, well, it's busted, isn't it? And of course, when these people like Richard Spencer started putting it about that somehow they were responsible for the election of Donald Trump, I thought, well, they're quite mad, aren't they? Bob Paxton says punching right 3 years ago is not the same as punching right because the right changed today. Come on, you know this, but I hope you find peace in a country you weren't born in, Matt. Oh dear. No. You see, so many of the black pillars that they don't want success because if success were to happen, then what good would they be anymore? Where would their importance be? I noticed yesterday that there was a complaint by some libertarian that was published in Forbes that legal immigration has been reduced by more than half by Donald Trump, and there's more to come. And that's a white pill, isn't it? The black pillars complain about lack of completion of the wall, despite all the court challenges and refusal of Congress to provide money, etc., etc. Well, there's more than one way to reduce immigration, and with Stephen Miller's assistance, Trump has proven himself to be quite good at this. Actually, that is to say, reducing immigration. Okay, so is there anything else here? Matt Forney says, KMG, since you're going to be reviewing Masculinity Against Madness next week, if you're interested in reviewing any of Terror House Press's other books, I can email you some ebooks. Well, thank you. Yes, it is Matt Forney's Terror House Press, which has published Ryan Landry's book, Masculinity Against Madness, which I will discuss next week. Okay, so that is the show for today and this week, an abbreviated week. Again, I'm sorry about that. I'll be back on the air, most definitely, Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to send a donation, which would be greatly appreciated at this time, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And if there are any Canadians listening who just want to send money to me directly to my bank account, that can be done through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. So I will leave you all with this. In these times of total atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that all of my dear viewers and listeners manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night. Hang on.